Greetings and welcome to Jefficho Films. Today we're going to talk about a 1994 sci-fi western with George Takei, Meg Foster, Musetta, Vander. It's even got Mr. Holmes from Star Trek TNG. So let's get started. Let's review Oblivion.
You got a problem, Red Eye?
Yeah, I got a problem. You, Marshal. That won't be a problem much longer.
You are a sick individual.
Damn right I am.
This movie starts out with one of those spaceships landing outside of town Oblivion, and a lizard man eats a lizard creature. And then we see Mr. Holmes, who's actually playing Mr. Gaunt in this one, and when he arrives, everybody goes running. He heads into Miss Kitty's saloon, and people fear him because he's always around when somebody dies. And Miss Kitty is played by Julie Newmar, who played Catwoman in the Adam West Batman. Red Eye is the lizard man, and he buries a blue crystal in the dirt outside, and Miss Kitty's very flirtatious with the Marshal. I guess that means he's gonna die, and Red Eye challenges him to a duel, and we get some strange looks from Meg Foster and Musetta Vander. The Marshal doesn't win, but the Marshal tried to cheat with that force field, and I think the crystal took care of that. Lash reveals herself, and Miss Kitty, well, she kind of oversells her name.
Boys? Much better.
Then we see a two-tailed scorpion who's going to eat Buteo, an Indian man who's pegged to the ground, but he's saved by Zack's stone, and Buteo must bury his family. Red Eye and Lash talk to their goons about their plans to run the town, and the two of them have implied sex, I reckon.
This town's up for grabs.
And I know he's going to be the biggest grabber.
Zack is the Marshal's kid, and him and Buteo sit around the campfire, and we learn that a man killed Buteo's family and did this to him. And then Mr. Gaunt shows up and tells Zack his father's dead. Doc Valentine, played by George Takei, is drunk. He's wandering the streets, and he's asking a bottle of Jim Beam to beam him up. He gets kicked out of the bar, and then he goes to the shop, and he talks to Mattie, and he even points a gun at her because he wants to get drunk.
I'm sorry I scared you, Mattie.
I knew you wouldn't really hurt me.
Stupid thing ain't even loaded.
Buteo chooses to be Zack's sidekick, and they go into Isaac Hayes' establishment, who plays Buster, and he goes there and he talks about how he wants to get enough money to get off this rock, and we meet Wormhole, who's a dude, and he's trying to get more men for Red Eye. He decides to fight Zack, and then it becomes a big bar fight until Mr. Gaunt shows up, and Zack takes care of Wormhole. Red Eye and his gang show up at Mattie's and they trash it, and she pulls a gun on them and they leave, but Lash flirts with her on her way out, and then when she gets outside she gets hit on by Spanner.
You gotta do more than jump claims before you can jump me, Spanner.
Zack arrives at his father's office and it's trash, and he finds Stell, Barr in a cell and lets her out. Mr. Gaunt is giving a eulogy with some bingo going on above. Zack sits down next to Mattie, and she didn't know that he was the Marshal's son when he gets up and he gives a bit of a speech. He says him and his father never saw eye to eye. Lash and Red Eye show up, and Buteo recognizes one of the henchmen must have been the one that killed his family, and after the service, Stelbar decides that this is a good time to hit on Buteo.
They say native men have incredible respect for women.
That is true.
They also say native men make the best lovers.
Mattie doesn't want anybody to get hurt, but she thinks Zack should have stood up to Red Eye. It's a bit of a contradiction because he would have died. Zack visits Doc, and Miss Kitty explains Zack is an empath that feels what others feel, physically, to Mattie. Buteo has a poisonous creature, and he brings it out onto the table when he arm wrestles Spanner. It senses fear, and if it touches you, you'll die. And Spanner fears it, and he dies. And then his friends shoot the frog creature. Then Stelbar shoots Bork to save Buteo, and Lash shows up and starts beating on him. And Bork's not dead, and he shoots Stelbar, and then she goes for assistance, and Doc finds her, and he asks for his tricorder after saying "Great Scotty."
Damn it, Stell. I'm a doctor, not a magician.
I've got to be here to hold down the fort.
If I don't fix you up, you won't be holding down anything. Zack, get me that tricorder there.
Lash starts whipping Buteo, and Zack shows up, and he can feel his pain, and Stelbar's, and he interferes, and then Wormhole challenges him, and he loses. And then he also shoots off Red Eye's arm and takes out a bunch of extras in slow-mo.
Are you willing to bet your life on that?
Don't give me that shit, Nebula boy. You both know. Your gun's empty.
Lash decides to kidnap Mattie, and we get to see a disturbing arm growing back on Red Eye. And Stell Barr wants Zack to be Marshal, and Mr. Gaunt shows up and says, Lash kidnapped Mattie. Thanks, we already knew that.
We couldn't bear to leave you behind, Princess. We like you too much.
We get into the Badlands and Bork attacks Stell Barr and how he's even alive. Zack gets into a gunfight and Red Eye shoots Mattie in the leg as she's trying to escape. And those two-tailed scorpions show up because they can smell the blood.
I suggest you get the hell out of here, Zack! Now what about Mattie? We'll send her back! When we're done with her!
While Lash is battling Buteo, Zack unties Mattie and gives her a gun, goes after Red Eye, and grabs his father's badge and he sticks it in Red Eye's good eye. Now can't see, he's blind, so he falls into a layer of scorpions, and Zack can feel his pain. Lash accidentally hits Bork, and then he chases her. How is he still alive? Been shot 3 times now and burnt.
Even you heard me! Even you!
Red Eye's then torn in half and eaten. It'll be interesting to see how he comes back in the sequel. Zack puts on his dad's badge and heads back into town. The end. Or to be continued. Judging by this DVD's cover, to be continued. This was goofy and a little bit cheesy, but I do like the cast. Obviously the more known ones were the best part of this. I do like Carel Struycken as Mr. Gaunt, and Meg Foster, who I loved as Evelyn in Masters of the Universe. Didn't actually like her much in this one, but those eyes. Those eyes. And George Takei as a drunken doctor throwing out Star Trek phrases might have been a little bit much, but this was made in the 90s for the 90s.
Jim, beam me up.
And Musetta Vander, the lovely Musetta Vander's Lash. She was great in this. Sexy, evil, a little bit over the top. And they could have taken her to another level, but this was pretty peachy.
Aren't you going to ask me to be gentle?
You've got to be kidding.
All in all, I don't hate it. It's a Sunday afternoon watchable cheesy fun. I'm not sure anybody else would agree, but to each their own. And I look forward to doing the sequel. Well, as always, thanks for watching and quit laughing at my cheesy hat.